Thank you for viewing my presentation. This is a video presentation of a collaborative lesson that is for my course IL 650 with Dr. Guess as my professor. I also want to make you aware of the fact that this is a summertime course through JSU and that the school is closed for waxing. Teachers are not at the school and children are at home playing. And hopefully lots of my teachers are home relaxing as well. So I'm going to begin my lesson now, and I really hope you enjoy it. Okay guys, thank you for allowing me to come in and share some of your research topics that will be available to you. Mr. Gaines and Miss Lemons and I worked very hard on preparing this lesson to enable you to get an overview of some information and highlights of the different topics that you and your partner will be able to choose from for your PowerPoint presentation. I understand that Mr. Gaines and Miss Lemons have already emailed you onto your Chromebooks the requirements, the expectations, the objectives, and the scoring rubric. I know that your PowerPoint presentation must be 7 or 8 slides long. You will have to have a cover slide. You'll have to have 3 slides of information on your topic, 4 slides of images from your topic, and then also a reference page. And I also understand that you and your partner will work on this every day in class. And once you and your partner choose your topic, Mr. Gaines will email you specific sites that you are to use on your Chromebooks to research the information, gather data, and use that data to prepare your PowerPoint presentations. I'm very excited I get to share in this with you, and I can't wait to come back in 2 weeks and enjoy these presentations that you work so hard on. So if you're ready to get started, we will. Thumbs up, ready to go. All right, first of all, when you rotate to Mr. Gaines Center, Mr. Gaines is going to talk with you about World War I and about the new technologies of our times in the 1920s. Miss Lemons is going to introduce World War II and the stock market crash. And then when you're with Miss Harbin, I'm going to introduce and give you some information about the Roaring '20s and the Great Depression, okay? And I've already asked you previously to pull up the PowerPoint slide that I prepared for you on your Chromebook. Mr. Gaines is using our ViewSonic, so therefore I'm having to use my iPad, and I just noticed that some of the pictures may be too small from where you're seated, and some of the words may not be able to be readable. So I've emailed you your PowerPoint. You should have it pulled up, and then that way you can easily see all of the images and the information that I have prepared for you. Okay? Everyone give me a thumbs up if your Chromebook is on the PowerPoint presentation. It should say the Roaring '20s and look just like mine. Okay? Thank you. Now I'm going to begin talking about the 1920s as a time of prosperity. World War I had ended. The soldiers were coming home. Americans were celebrating a win, and it was at an all-time high of excitement and living for Americans. Jobs were more available at that time than ever before, and pay was at an all-time high. So therefore, with everyone wanting to celebrate and everybody's rolling in money, they began spending excessively. They spent all their money on entertainment, going to the movies, automobiles, radios, and other consumer goods. At this time in the 1920s, electricity was becoming more readily available for everyone as electricity and power lines were being spread throughout America. Now, on the wish list of just about every home at that time, they wanted a car, they wanted a radio, they wanted a refrigerator, and a telephone, and a vacuum cleaner. Now, guess what? Back in the 1920s, you could buy a brand new Model T Ford for $260. I'm just going to share with you. Miss Harbin has to pay more than $260 a month just for a payment on her car. So times have really changed since back then. I could buy a whole brand new car for less than 1 month's payment on my car that I own now. Well, because money was plentiful and goods were easily available, that time had the motto of live now and pay later. Because banks in the 1920s began lending money to individuals, and you could buy things like a refrigerator or a car on credit, and then you paid it back on installment plans. So people were buying things with money that they really didn't have at that time. Okay? This was a huge, huge time in the lives of women in America, because women were given the right to vote. They could also attend college, and they could work on jobs and earn their own wages. Now, I want to tell you, because cars were so easily to purchase at that time, over 1 million cars during that time were said to be roaring up and down the roads. So therefore, the term the Roaring Twenties was formed from that time frame, because of the roaring of the engines racing up and down the roads. Now, entertainment. Entertainment was really big back then, and I'm going to stop and say, I understand that Mr. Gaines was playing some music for you this morning as you came in that you don't normally listen to. Yeah, that's jazz music. Did you like it? I see some heads nodding. I see some heads shaking their head no. Well, back in the 1920s, that became the music of that time. It was also referred to as the Jazz Age. And jazz music could be heard on the radios. It could be heard on dance halls. It could be heard just in anywhere that you heard music. Most of the time it was jazz music of that time. They also, going to dance halls was a huge entertainment outlet at that time. And what was being played there? Jazz music. And new dances were introduced for that time. One of them was called the Charleston. One of them was called the Shimmy. And then another one was called the Turkey Trot. Well, I don't know about you, but Miss Harbin's not real sure about the Shimmy and the Turkey Trot. I don't think I've ever seen those. But I could make a life connection with the Charleston, because I have seen that performed on Dancing with the Stars. Okay, now, the radio. Why was that such a big deal? Well, back then, they didn't have TVs, PlayStations, iPads, cell phones. The radio was the entertainment. And families would circle around the radio at night, and they would listen to jazz music. They would listen to comedy shows. They'd listen to news shows. They'd listen to dramas. Also, if you were not fortunate enough to have a radio, some of your neighbors had radios, and they would invite families over, and everyone would just sit in the living room and listen to the radio. Now, you know, Miss Harbin taught reading and history for a long, long time. And I love the fact that they had the radio, because you know what? The radio, when you were listening to those shows, you didn't have pictures. So where did you develop your pictures? Right, in your mind, using your imagination. So I liked that. I think that was a great idea. Now, let's talk a little bit about the clothing. Now, as I said, money just spent right and left, and men wanted imported tailored suits. Most of them were pinstriped. They also had imported silk shirts. They wore suspenders. Every man had a hat on, and they either wore the bow ties or the long ties, and patent leather shoes. Now, if you'll look at this picture of this gentleman here that I put on my PowerPoint presentation, I know his hair looks kind of funny, but that was the style of that day. And I know we don't see very many people, even our grandmas and grandpas, looking like that. So it looks kind of funny, and I realize that. But I want you to look at the pictures of these ladies in these portraits. Those short hairdos, the headband with the feathers coming out, the jewelry, the women standing there in short dresses and big heavy coats with that mink stole around it. Yes, even in Alabama, they were wearing those coats with the mink stoles because that was a luxury item and they had the money to buy it and they wanted one, okay? So also, women were wearing shorter dresses. They were wearing dresses that showed their knees. That was a no-no back then. And sometimes women would go out to the beaches in bathing suits and didn't have their legs covered, and they would be arrested because that was not acceptable. Now, women of that time also began wearing that bright red lipstick and that rouge, and they cut all that long hair off into little short bobs, and you'll see some pictures of that as you scroll through my PowerPoint. And women were named or often referred to as the flappers. And so I want you to research that, and I want you to come back. The first one that comes off the bus tomorrow comes to my office and tells me, hey, I know why the term flappers became popular in the 1920s. I have a special reward for you, okay? Now, we talked about the fun, exciting, spending, entertaining, living life at its best with the Roaring 20s. Now we're going to talk a few minutes about the Great Depression. The Great Depression began in 1929 with the crash of the stock market. People were out of work. People were not getting paid. Thousands of businesses closed. People lost their homes. They lost their life savings. They became homeless and they were starving. President Hoover was the president at this time, and he was blamed for the poor economy, the stock market crash, and the depression of economy that the Americans were living in at that present time. 11,000 banks closed during that time. 300,000 businesses closed because there were no funds. No one had jobs. No one had money. No one was buying those goods. So they just sat there, and the economy just got worse and worse and worse. And if you were fortunate enough to be able to have a job, you were paid 40% less than you were just several years prior to that time. Now I want to talk to you about the Great Drought. Now, the Great Drought began in 1931 as it went long periods of time without rain. Crops began to die due to the onset of the severe drought. The grounds were bare, they were overplowed, farmland, they were condemned useless because they could not plant and harvest crops. Eroding soil led to massive dust clouds and in the mid-United States. But everyone, even all the way over to New York and the eastern coast, were affected by this. And as billowing clouds of dust would darken the sky for sometimes days at a time, and then it would blow so much dust that it would also look like a storm, a snowstorm. Have you ever seen the pictures nowadays of the snowstorms and people are out there plowing their way out of their houses? Well, that's what was happening here. They were having to plow their way out of their home using shovels, and they were shoveling sand and dirt. Dirt was working its way and dust into the crevices of home. It was layered all over the furniture, food, the people, the skin, and lots of Americans died at this time from dust pneumonia. And then many people died for lack of water and lack of food and livestock. There was a huge amount of livestock that died due to the great droughts and the dust storms. Now, hunger in shanty towns. When people were out of work and they were out of their homes, they were starving, they were desolate, and people would stand in line for hours at the soup bowl kitchens to get free food. And also families would stand in line for hours in the bread lines to get bread and other items that they could have in the homes for their family. Now, those that had lost their homes and were homeless, the government set up things called shanty towns. And these were like little camps where you see like Boy Scouts going up in these rough terrain tents on the ground, no running water, no bathroom. Tents were made available for families to live in and have shelter, and they were also provided food for free in these shanty towns. Well, everyone was still mad at the president, so they often referred to the shanty towns as Hoovervilles. Now, I've shared with you your information on the Great Depression and on the Roaring Twenties, and I hear Mr. Gaines giving the signal that it's time for us to change groups. I hope you find one of my topics interesting and want to research it and present about it. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you present in 2 weeks. Thank you.